Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. My name is Matt Gardner. I have a special guest today, Beth ANSTANDIG. So, Beth, psychotherapist and lifelong cowgirl, and author of the book The Human Herd, which came out last April of 2022. Beth, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate that. So, yes, let's before we get into the book and everything else you have going on, I would love to know more about yourself. Obviously, the lifelong cowgirl thing. I love your bio, by the way. It definitely has some personality and some zest, so I appreciated that. But yeah, I'd love to know a lot more about you. So your upbringing and just sort of what got you into this line of work in the first place. So a little bit more about Beth before we get into what you're doing, please.
Sure. They're actually almost impossible to untangle from each other because I think so much of what we do professionally um, often does have or needs to relate to who we are personally. And that's actually a lot of what I do to help people is to help people be more aligned and integrated with all parts of their lives. Um, I think first and foremost, I'm a writer, and that's really how I identify. I think myself at the core, and how I see the world is, through the eyes of a noticer of details and kind of a poetic lens. And I did get an MFA in poetry. It was my first graduate degree, and I taught for quite a while and wrote, and that was my main focus professionally and personally. And but I grew up with animals, with a love of animals, and I think that would probably be like the second layer of identity for me is just the kind of guidance and education and wisdom that I gained over the years from my relationships with my animals, and that started at a very young age. I grew up in a really chaotic family environment, um, a lot of addiction and untreated mental illness and codependency and like the whole litany of problems. And so a lot of the way that I coped was through my imagination and through language and through that poetic world and through the world of animals, and it became my little safe haven. And it also became a way for me to run and escape. And which, a lot of times the things that we do to cope at the time are what we have available, but then end up becoming problematic. And so, um, and even something as beautiful and innocent as poetry and a love for animals, it did end up being a way for me to not have to deal with the world of humans um, and and to not develop some capacities and skills that I was going to need to be a integrated part of human culture. And so there were parts of me that went pretty undeveloped because I learned at a young age to run inward.
Hmm. I imagine that serves you well now, but like you say, there is that degree of, realizing that what you had been doing when you were younger, to cope, it
Yeah.
does become, and that's a great way to segue into, something to talk about. It's like where it does no longer serves you and it's starting to echo into your adulthood and it's now affecting the way that you're, like, as you put it, interacting and showing up in the world. So where
Right.
was that stage where you had that self-awareness? Was there certain lessons that were taught or reflected back to you, or was it was there like an aha moment where you're like, oh, okay, this is definitely not serving me anymore?
Well, the awareness has always been there. And I think in some ways it's actually like my greatest gift. And also the thing that plagues me the most is just this keen awareness of what's happening within me and around me. And I can't really turn that off. And
Mm.
now I've learned that it's like a superpower I don't want to turn off. But when I was younger, I had that awareness, and it made life in a chaotic world and a stressful world very intolerable.
Mm.
So I have early memories of the awareness that what was going on in my inner world and my sense about whether things were off balance or felt unhealthy or unsafe I have very early memories of that.
Mm.
And then I would say, and then I have early memories of choosing that interior world, consciously, like withdrawing and retreating. And then I think for most humans, that, that ability to go into that imaginary world, that interior space, we lose that when our hormones go into full throttle, and everything that we could do that was like go into this kind of dreamlike reverie state of childhood, we lose.
Mm.
And things that were painful and we were aware of may become even more painful. And I think there's no accident that when that happens, that's the precise time that a lot of people do start using drugs and alcohol and other substances or self-destructive behaviors. And I actually think that the framework that I've really adopted around this is that that's our first spiritual crisis.
Mm.
And we do not have adults around us who see us that way when we're at that age. And instead, we're just big problems. And
Mm.
so I think that for me, the awareness of like, okay, I knew it was bad. I had a way to cope. I lost that way to cope. And now I know it's bad. It's even worse than I thought.
Mm.
And actually, I have nothing. I have nothing to
Mm.
cope. And then enter drugs and alcohol, which were, a house that I grew up in was called the Mushroom Manor, and it had like a psychedelic mushroom flag flying in the front. It was like a my parents' hippie house, and
Mm.
there were plenty of substances around for me to experiment with. And as soon as I realized I could change how I felt with substances, I was pretty aware that that was. I struggled with a right or wrong around it and wanting to be a good kid, but I also knew from like how uncomfortable I felt in my soul and body and mind and heart that, I was aware that using substances, mostly marijuana and alcohol at that time, but then it, evolved into experimenting with anything that I could get my hands on.
Yeah.
But I definitely, there was really a personal crisis happening then without any tools or support around me.
Yeah, right. I can hear that. Did you have a stage like in that time frame that you're mentioning where you started to resent some of the way that you were before, or was it more so just like a numbing of it? And you mentioned it's like, we have that sort of crisis. Was that coupled by a resentment to the way that you used to be? Or was there still like a longing to get back to that stage? Or were you kind of uncertain at that stage?
I don't know if I would call it a resentment, but maybe like a conflict around,
Mm.
um, like, I don't think it had like an angry, resenty quality to it as much as it was like identity crisis and trying to figure out who I was, and was I still that poet and artist inside? Was I party girl? Was I a stoner, like hippie chick? Was I,
Yeah.
this kind of nature animal person that was very intuitive? And I think most of us struggle with identity stuff around that age, but I don't
Mhm.
recall it being like it having like a resentful quality
Mm.
to it, more just kind of like turmoil, inner turmoil, but not necessarily parts fighting with each other yet. That came
Gotcha.
later, I would
That
say.
came later. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Coming soon, right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious too, like if there was some dabbling, like you mentioned and thank you for the honesty,
Oh, yeah,
the
yeah.
alcohol and the marijuana. I mean, if you're getting into psychedelics, I'm curious, more curiosity. Uh, did that change anything for you as far as, because like I know for me, like if I've done mushrooms out camping or whatnot, I have this like whole connection with nature that was amplified, and as well as like musicians. So all of a sudden I have this like different perspective on my imagination. As you said, it's like a big thing for you. Did you find that it enhanced your imagination, or did you
Yeah.
start like using the drugs and alcohol to sort of enhance some of those sides of you, or so you
Oh,
perceived at the time?
yeah. I
Okay.
mean, and that was part of the conflict, was like, this is working for me. This
Right,
is
right.
absolutely like, as an artist and a poet. I mean, when I went to poetry school, I'd already experimented with psychedelics when I was younger. But when I went to poetry school, all of a sudden there was this whole part of me that was surrounded by a community of other artists. We were given a 3-year period. Our MFA program was 3 years that was very well supported by a university and structure and guidance
Mm,
and mentorship. And then we were just like wild artists running around the desert.
yeah.
And it was like this incredibly formative time for me as an artist. And the addict alcoholic part of me, was I believe kind of that was the more destructive part, was kind of like doing push-ups in the background, like getting
Yeah.
stronger. But
Yes.
I think they're separate. I don't think I do think that I benefited from
Mm,
doing those things, and I really was using them because I was that spiritual crisis when I found the world of, I really delved more into art and the mind and my imagination and my intellect and using substances to open up some of those doors. I felt like I was finding parts of myself
mm,
that I actually liked and wanted, that are still very much present for me. And I'm 14 and a half years sober.
mm.
And um that I'm glad I have access to those parts, and I feel lucky that I got through that alive
Right.
and
Yeah.
sane, and like I
Sure.
didn't do like brain damage to myself around some of the things that I tried, or I didn't like, jump off a cliff or something like while
Yeah.
in the desert on mushrooms or something. But like I'm very
Sure.
fortunate, but I can't say that it was altogether bad at all. And it wasn't. It was, you know, there's a saying like, with alcoholism or addiction, like first it was fun and then it was fun with problems and then it was just problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
100%.
so for me it was enriching.
Hmm.
And like you said, it did open up these, like the Aldous Huxley, like doors of perception. Like
Yeah.
it
100.
definitely, it did do that
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like the honesty too. There's a lot of people that still have they're hesitant to say that they got something out of it because for some
Mm,
reason that whatever mind trip they might be on, that it's like, well, that's admitting that like I liked myself back then. And so I appreciate, like, because I'm the same way as you. Like I did a lot of psychedelics and I really did open perspective. It increased my perspective, which was huge for me,
yeah.
especially in that formative time. So I imagine it was the same for you. So I'd really appreciate you saying that, and you can look
Yeah.
back, and congratulations, by the way, that's amazing. 14 and a
Thank
half years
Yeah.
that you can still look back on it and go, no, there was some like elements of that made me who I am. So, that's
Yeah.
important.
I think, I'm a therapist and I've done just a shit ton of my own therapy throughout the years. And actually, my mother is a licensed psychologist. So
Wow.
that crazy childhood that I described was being supervised by my
Yeah.
psychologist mother. So there you
Wow.
go.
Right.
But it's like the cobbler's kids have
Yeah.
no shoes. Yeah. But I was,
Yeah.
um, but you know, I I look back at like that period, as I've healed more and more, and even recently in the last few years, I did a little bit like a deep dive, another like kind of period of therapy because I got
Mm,
divorced,
mm,
and there was a lot of like working through around trying to understand the marriage and my role in it, and some healing around that for me personally. And I did some EMDR trauma work, which I've done throughout the years as a client, and I also got certified in it and trained in how to do EMDR with people. And along the way, one of the things that came up was like some shame around the drugs and alcohol.
mm, mhm,
And what came out of the healing work around that was really understanding how well I took care of myself when I was younger, and that
mm,
drugs and alcohol were a form of self care when I had
mm.
nothing available. So it's like
Wow.
you hear people like drinking their own urine
Yeah.
because they're like stranded on a desert island or
Yeah.
like on a raft or something. And you're like, well, yeah, because you're trying to survive.
Right.
And like I was a person with like intense depression and anxiety and
Mm,
trauma and very alone, and I was very sensitive artistic spirit in a chaotic environment. And like I took the duct tape and bubble gum and patch together
Yeah.
a psyche that could handle the
Yeah.
world. And like the
Gotcha.
duct tape and bubble gum did involve drugs and alcohol, but like I was actually trying to take care of myself.
That's super cool. Wow.
And
Yeah.
I'm not saying that I would do it again now because
Sure,
I have
sure.
other tools that are much less destructive for me, but like that is what I was up to. And now I don't feel any shame around those choices. And, I feel really at peace with it.
That's so important. That's such beautiful insight and, insight from your unique story and your unique journey to have gotten to this stage. And here you are, 14 plus years in, and you're still on that healing journey. You're still seeking out to go back and, find out what that was all about. So, super inspiring. So thank you so much
Thank
for sharing.
you.
That's really
Yeah,
cool perspective on it. I
thank you.
love that. So yeah, let's walk into where you made this like decision, where I guess the initial deciding to sober up, and what got you into this next stage of your life. Like, was there did you have what they call like a rock bottom moment, or was it just sort of an accumulation? Yeah, tell us a little bit about that, please.
I had so many opportunities for rock bottom. Like, I don't know if you've heard that phrase, like rock bottoms, like it was for me, it was like a trampoline. Like I like hit it and just
Yeah.
bounce back up. And, it was like,
Yeah.
God, is anything going to be rock bottom here? And so
Yeah.
when I look back at, when I did do the 12 steps, and when I don't know how open you are here about programs of
Go
recovery.
ahead. Yeah. Everything's on the table. Go
I'm
ahead.
just pretty open about my program, and I'm still very active in my own recovery program, and well supported and part of fellowship and community around that. And I
Cool.
still do something every day for my recovery.
Very
I'm
cool.
really active in that, and it's really helped me develop and stay seeking, um,
Yes. Yeah.
and learning and coping with things like walking through the end of a 20-year marriage and being okay,
Yeah.
and
Wow.
not having my life fall apart or
Hmm.
my inner world fall apart. So there were all these opportunities, I mean, really bad situations, both externally, so like external unmanageability that took the form of like getting arrested and big accidents and injuries and failing at jobs and things like that, and embarrassing situations. And then this internal unmanageability of just emotionally having these like spirals that I would go that would happen, and difficulty dealing with myself, and a lot of confusion about what is wrong with me.
Mm.
And especially because I was like seeking and doing therapy, and I was always looking for spiritual psychological answers, and it was like, God, what is wrong with me? And so
Mm.
that final moment where I just that hit the wall with my addiction, alcoholism, was like the most boring run of the mill, like
Yeah.
drunk. I just got really
Yeah.
drunk, had a blackout, really bad hangover.
Mm.
I'd say probably on the verge of alcohol poisoning, but that was not abnormal. Like that for me, like
Right.
I definitely drank like that. And like blackout drinker, lots of alcohol poisoning incidents.
Mm.
But it
Hmm.
was like I was a licensed therapist, I was married, my husband at the time was sober,
Mm.
and like there I was, and I wasn't drinking every day, but when I did drink, it was like you just never knew what was going to happen. And so it was just one of those like middle of the night laying on the bathroom floor moments where I thought I'm never going to be able to become a mom if I drink like this. Like
Yeah.
how would I even be a mother?
Mm.
And that just sat with me for like 48 hours. Like, I don't even know if I want to be a mom. Where did that thought even come from? Like, I wasn't sure I even wanted to become a parent. I've been married for 6 years, and I was like, just not sure about having a child. But that was the thought, and it
Hmm.
woke me up.
Yeah.
And I just decided I was not going to drink anymore. I wasn't an alcoholic, but I was not going to drink anymore. That was certainly not the first time that I'd made that decision.
Yeah.
Um, but then I started unraveling a bit.
Yeah.
And about 6 months into my dry period, my sobriety, with no help, no support. I really was just emotionally melting down. And
Mm.
so I started going to meetings and getting help. And that's when things really changed for me.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for the recollection.
Yeah.
Yeah, that first stage, and we would always talk about like the white knuckling
Oh,
can
yes.
work, right? But gosh, it's so challenging, and how sustainable it is. I mean, and do you really want to live like that? Do I really want to live like that? The answer is no. There's
Oh,
a
I
it's
would have definitely drank again. There's no
right.
way. Because I would have
So
been right back where I
yeah,
started, which was without tools.
right. And isn't
Yeah,
it interesting too? I'm just wondering, I'm curious about it. It's worth noting, like that whole thought that came through you, as far as I can never be a mother, wondering where that came from. Are you at like a sort of a spiritual sense that perhaps that was like placed from like a guide or something? Like, do you believe in that? Okay, that's cool.
I
Because
do. I mean,
yeah,
I've had so many, not especially, I mean, throughout my life, but especially now. I noticed when I got sober, people talked about miracles, and there was, people talk a lot about spirituality, not necessarily religion, but people have religious paths, but they talk a lot about spiritual awakening. And it's no accident that like alcohol is called spirits,
right.
right? Like we
Yeah.
definitely are using spirits to try to like feel more spiritual. And then when we don't have that, something happens that,
Hmm.
and I noticed that there were all kinds of things happening within me and around me. And I started to, when I got sober, and I started to wonder if that had been happening all the way along. I just was so in my own fog of like just messy thinking, emotional kind of turmoil, drinking, running from problems, that I couldn't see any of it,
Yeah.
and or
Yeah.
hear that inner voice or that higher self or higher power. And so I think it was always there. And then I think there was a period where it was a lot foggier. And then I think since I've gotten sober, I really learned to listen to that. So
Hmm.
that wasn't an unusual, like, God, where did that thought come from? But it was a very odd thought because I
Yeah.
was not thinking about, I wasn't in any kind of discernment about becoming a parent. And I was like drunk on the bathroom floor. So, like,
Right.
what? You're not
Where
like,
did that? Yeah.
not the most romantic shall I become a mother moment. I was like
Sure.
covered
Sure.
in puke and like
Yeah.
shaking, like
Yeah. 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 Not the traditional. Yeah. Shall I become a mother? Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
but yeah, like let me journal about it. I was like, no,
Yeah.
I just want to not die of like
Yeah.
hangover. And
Yeah.
but I did end up having my daughter. So I got sober in 2008. She was born at the end of 2010. So it was almost 3 years sober when I had her. And
Amazing.
it's very, very clear to me now. There's no way I could have become a mother and I would have absolutely been a drunk mom. There's
Yeah.
no question. And
Yeah.
because once I've learned what it's like to be a parent, it's very hard.
Yeah. You're
And
like, that would have been
I needed
triggering.
a
That would have
lot
been,
of
yeah.
support, and I
Yeah.
needed
Right.
some skills around asking for help and not knowing what to do and reaching out and letting people in, and like whole parts of myself that were not developed
Yes.
because of the running and the thinking and the drinking. And I I now know that that voice that was like that, you're not going to be able to do this without some this work. And
Right.
it was very
Yeah.
true. And
And you're,
my daughter's never seen me drink, and she's grown up in sobriety. She knows what
yeah.
recovery is. There's a
Yeah.
lot of alcoholism on both sides of her genetics, and so
Hmm.
it's
Yeah.
important that she know about it. And
Yeah.
I'm so grateful. And she's 12, and she said to me she's so glad to have a sober mom. And
Aw.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, she's seen her friends' parents drunk, and
Sure.
she's seen the worry of alcoholism in people's
Yeah.
families and what happens. And
Right. And
yeah,
she'll be, I mean, she's getting to the age, in a few years where there's going to be some more experimentation in her social group. So for her to be able to say that and view that and have that perspective leading in, whew,
yeah,
talk about a leg up, right? So,
yeah. I'm
yeah,
seeing that awakening in her right now, where
right.
all of a sudden, the inner world and exterior world are shifting their relationship, and she's more affected by things inside and around her. And she doesn't,
Mm,
she's always been a pretty aware kid too, but you know, she's having to learn to cope, and
right.
that she's talking about it. excuse me, about it, and we're working on it together, and she has a lot of support. But it's interesting because that's the age that I was when I started
Right. That is
drinking and using, is
interesting.
how old she is now. So
Wow.
I
Yeah.
had like my first major incident with alcohol at her age right now.
Interesting, right? I'm
Yeah.
sure that shows up in you. I'm sure, like
Yeah,
not
it
in your
does. I'm like,
mindset, like in
oh
your
yeah,
body,
I
right? You're
know
like,
why I did
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So interesting. Yeah. Wow. Very cool. Very cool stories. Okay, so we know where you are now. Like by this point, yes, you've had you're 3 years into sobriety. You've had a child. When did it sort of come together for you as far as, hey, what am I doing with my life as far as my purpose? Getting into, obviously you have a fairly substantial body of work by the sounds of it, between like psychotherapist, helping like CEOs, high performing people. When did that start coming along, and or has that always been in the background? It sounds like there's a
Yeah.
degree of like you're the second generation. Your mom was doing it too, so born to do that perhaps. Like, yeah, just
Yeah.
tell us a little bit more about that.
I mean, the good news is that I'm like a pretty sturdy, resilient person. So despite the fact that I was like running like blindfolded with nose plugs and like one leg through my disease of alcoholism, I still
Yeah,
managed to like get educated and build a career. And so
yeah.
I was doing that all the way along, and I was teaching, and noticed in teaching creative writing, there's a lot of deep personal work that you do with your students. And I
Mm,
realized that I didn't love being in an academic setting. Part of that may have had to do with my alcoholism and just being very intolerant of the world around me. But so it was a little rebellion of like, I don't like it here. I'm going to go back to school and become a therapist, and then I can kind of do my own thing, I can make my own professional world and not have to be in an institution, with a university institution. And so I went back to school, and I wasn't sober yet. So I made that change in 2000, and then it took me a few years to go through graduate school and get licensed and build a practice. And that definitely, like, I got healthier, and I got married. My ex-husband, he got sober. Like, there was some developing happening. And I really did, I was able to excel building that practice, the psychotherapy practice. But I look back on it now, and I'm like, oh yeah, that was definitely, I was running.
mm,
I was like, I can't be a poet in a university. Like, this is not working for me. I don't want to have to deal with myself. So I'm going to go get licensed
mm.
to help other people. It was
Yeah.
like a
Okay. Yeah.
big codependent leap.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to deal with me, so I'm going to help you.
Yeah. Right.
And
Yeah.
and I look back on it now, and I'm like, God, I became a therapist for like the worst reason ever. It was
Right.
absolutely hiding from myself.
Wow. That's
And
powerful.
so then when I got sober, it really cracked that open, and I had another big developmental leap. And I realized that some of the aspects of being a therapist were a little constricting for me. Like, I really wanted to keep helping people, but I became much more comfortable with myself
Mm,
and my identity as an artist and an animal person. And I was like, I just want to bring more of this into my work.
mhm.
And when I bought my ranch and I had a place where started to realize that I could create like a healing space. And
Mm, mhm.
but I didn't really do that intentionally. I bought the ranch because I wanted to live on it. And then once I was here, I realized I just wanted my whole self to be present in the work that I was doing. And, you know, traditional therapy has a kind of a paradigm that is very much like you and your client sitting in a kind of quasi artificial living room, and you do your 1 hour a
Yeah.
week, and like, and as I got more sober and more developing myself and more comfortable in my own skin, I was like, I think I have a freak flag to fly here. It's not the mushroom manor, it's not that,
Yeah.
but like, I think this part of me that like has more to offer, I'm more comfortable and stable to be able to stand in. And so I started bringing people to work with me and my animals and going to more training to understand like how to incorporate experiential work into healing and
Mm,
working with equine therapy. And
wow.
I mean, I just fell in love with that so instantly. I was like, I can't not do this work anymore.
Right,
And
right.
people just started asking for it. I never marketed or tried to build my business. It just grew and
Wow.
became what it is now. And then, you know, and as that unfolded, the writing really came back, and I was that part of me as an artist and a writer. I realized, oh, it actually is full circle. I can bring that to the work that I'm doing, and so
Mm.
I really reintegrated that part of me.
It's so perfect. I was about to say it seems like big full circle on a lot of this, right? It's like this stuff that you started out with, it was so you and so what you wanted to be a part of you, and then there's like you kind of get detached. You have this like conflict of identity and who am I and what am I doing at the stage, and then there's the substances that get involved for good and for bad reasons,
Yeah.
for experiential reasons, we'll say. And then here it is, comes full circle, and you found a way to still do the work that you like doing, but bringing more of you into it.
Yeah.
And isn't it funny that when you can essentially find that right formula, all of a sudden this need for marketing and everything sort of more or less fades away. People are
Oh
actually
yeah.
asking about it. Isn't that fascinating? Like
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm positive that, and I found that even through my therapy career, which really, I had a really thriving practice with a waiting list. And it was like, how did people always ask me, like, how did that happen? And, you know, I really do think that when we're very aligned with what we're doing and we're absolutely sitting in the seat of the true self, like your true, there's a lot of different models that talk about this. Like, is it, you know, your, you know, zone of genius? Is it your true self? Is it, you know,
Mm,
like what your highest self, like your integrated self? Whether, there's all these different ways of putting it, but I do think when we come into alignment of who we really are, we're most authentically living, breathing, and settled with ourselves. It's attractive and energizing, and it's self-generative, and so
right.
it has a force and an energy unto itself. And so things come more easily.
Mm,
And I think that when you're hitting, I've always just looked at like, because I use nature and animals as guides and teachers, and I'm like, the water is either flowing or it's not flowing. If there's a
right.
blockage, like what
Yeah.
is it that's causing that? You'll know when you've moved it because the water will be moving again.
Right.
I'm
Right.
in flooding California right now, so I've
I
got
was going to
lots of
ask you
water
about that.
metaphors.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, it's like I really followed that for myself. And you know, if things aren't moving, there's a reason for it systemically. And so there's all these like marketing gimmicks, and anytime they've come my way, I always look at them and think like, this is all the workarounds, I think,
Mm,
of getting away from the work that you have to do to be fully in
yeah.
alignment. And when you
Yeah.
are, the answers and the movement happen.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's beautiful. It's funny that you're mentioning this. It so resonates with me. I just had a call uh with somebody about like the business that I'm running, and very much was that he was able to reflect back to me patterns that I am using that are preventing me from the one thing, like hard to describe, and that's for another time for to get into the details of it. But yeah, literally what you said is like what I just experienced right before we got on the call. So it's
Oh, wow. Yeah.
funky how that, how that
Yeah.
comes about, right? Yeah, super cool. I'm really enjoying this conversation. I before we, I want to just get off the beaten path a little bit and
Sure.
just certain words that do get thrown around and such. So I want to get because you are living it, you've embodied these words. So for me, and so for some of the listeners, I'm sure you're still at sort of that affirmation phase where I'm like, I'm, trying it on, I'm, breathing into it, I'm visualizing and that sort of thing. Whereas you're literally living it. So I'm curious what you say about like so aligned, like being aligned with yourself. How does somebody know that when they're still kind of finding their way? You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Well, the work that I do, and the reason why I I love this question, and it actually the answer might be surprising because we're going to talk about horses. But the
Yeah, yeah.
reason why the animals have been my guide, and why I invite people to work with them, is because they help us identify a feeling
Mm,
in ourselves as mammals of when something's out of balance.
mm,
And we bypass that mammalian sensory system with our thinking and our relating and our talking. And it's very numbed out and muted. And the animals are able to pick up on within us where we're holding pressure and tension and where our nervous system is off, so
mm.
that when we're interacting with them, they help us find those places where we're out of alignment, which usually we're just doing things with horses. It could be grooming or walking or just spending time with the herd. And what starts to happen behaviorally and what starts to come out of people's mouths are all of the places where they're trying to come into alignment. The horses will
Mm,
give us feedback about
mm.
the more in alignment with it we are, it feels so good in the nervous system that
Yeah.
they want to be near it.
Hmm.
And when
Wow.
we're off, they move away from it.
Yeah.
Or they come in and try to help us settle ourselves.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I think that we're not very, we don't, we're used to looking for it in an intellectual realm. And, look, I'm like, I love intellectual exercise like that. Aside from drinking, it was my drug of choice.
Yeah.
Really, like
Yeah.
intellectual, like discourse and theory, and like diving into, like, I have lots of degrees because I was like, that was part of how I ran from myself.
Mm.
It's still delicious to me and I love it. And I will do thought experiment and conversation and discernment and language with people all day long. But this other part that we don't have as much access to is equally valuable, necessary for us to know ourselves. And so I think half the time we're just believing our own bullshit
Mm.
that's going through our heads or coming out of our mouths.
Mm.
But there's all these signals going on in the nervous system and the body that we're not tuned in with, that
Yeah.
have just as much information. And sometimes they're conflicting.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I really look to that part of me now way more than I do, or first. Then
Right.
I layer on the intellectual piece. Like, they've got to be in conversation with each other. But I
Right.
spent a huge part of my life numbing the nervous system and the body with everything I could get my hands on or get my brain focused on. And then, and so as that's come more and more back to life, that help. I mean, I can sense in a system when something's off, and I don't want to say this in like, I'm not doing like telepathy or like, channeling, but
Right.
we have, as mammals, the capacity to come into a relational system or a group system, and feel
Mm.
when
Mhm.
something is flowing or not.
Sure. Yeah.
That's our survival system. So
Jeez.
the
Yeah.
work that I do is to help people become way more attuned to that within themselves, in
Mm.
their relationships, in their families or their work groups, in their environment, so that they have access to that beautiful, you know, um, set of instinct capacities. I wouldn't, I mean, they are skills, they're skills kind of layered on them, but they're capacities.
Yeah, I love that. I love that whole thing. Like I'm just picturing that with the horses is such a beautiful thing, and getting into the whole animal, and even just connection with nature has been big for me. I have a couple of dogs that I love, and they're so intuitive with what's going on with me as well. And and just like I like the phrase like the intelligence of nature or move at the pace of nature, and totally get that. Yeah, no, look, that was a wonderful answer. I really appreciate you, taking a deeper dive into that side of it. That's great. It's so exciting. Like even just hearing you say that, I can feel in my body, like, it reacting to that whole answer. Right. So yeah, there's definitely something there, even through us
Yeah,
talking through a Zoom call.
if you don't have animals, I have a pack of dogs too, and they're a
Cool.
huge source of of teaching for me. I learned so much from them, and I always have. Dogs have been a huge part of my world. And I live here on the ranch. I have sheep and chickens and cats, and like all of the different, like learning from these different animals, and they're from a variety of places on the food chain. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
it's very interesting. And they all have this sense of how to take care of themselves, how to rely on each other,
Mm,
and how to be in the world. And this piece is really important to me to make sure we communicate like human to human, is that we don't need animals per se to teach this to us. You just need humans who are a little bit more like animals,
gotcha.
who are very connected to that natural leadership.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
when you find them, because you can feel like you can settle and be more at ease, and you also feel safe.
Mm,
And you don't always know why, but you just have this sense that like
yeah.
we're we could get through things together.
Right. Ooh, that's really good. Yeah.
And they're picking up on my energy, and I feel like they're reading me,
Hmm.
and they're letting me read them. And I'm like, so we could get a groove going. And you'll watch kids like on a playground, or
Yeah.
animals, they'll
Yeah.
instantly click with each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we have that ability to sense that in each other and give that to each other. Once we don't always have to go do these deep dives into like equine therapy or equine
Yeah.
assisted learning or
Yeah.
leadership work. You can
Sure.
actually give this to other humans once you have more access to it.
So let's get into that. How do we access that as humans? Like, and I imagine this is covered in your book. Correct me if I'm wrong. I love the title, by the way, the human herd. Is this like, how does one how would I cultivate that within myself? What practice is that? Is that through like a meditation practice, breath work? Like, I'm imagining it has a lot to do with getting more in tune with your body, getting out of here. I'm pointing at my head for the listeners, getting back down into here, pointing at my heart. Like, what are certain things that have worked for you or that you teach as far as like getting back into that sort of intuitive, heart-based life?
Yeah. So the first piece is understanding that all the different sources of information that our whole self is offering us.
Mm,
And so we creating some experiences and practices for ourselves to get to know what's going on under the hood. And
mm,
that has to do, so meditation is a great way of learning how to train the mind and understand more of what's going on in our minds. Breath work is a great way of understanding what's going on in the nervous system and the respiratory system. And it's often a door that opens into the heart and into the emotional system.
mm.
And same with thought work. So meditation work will often open up emotional systems.
Yeah.
But we want to look at like what are the different gates or openings that are going to
Mm,
allow us to really know ourselves, so that every day throughout the day, when I ask myself, how am I doing? I know what to check.
right. Ooh, that's good.
So the first channel of awareness in natural leadership is what's going on within me.
Mm, mhm.
And I have to get to know how to check that. And sometimes we have a really incomplete check system. It would be like, oh, well, when I go to get in my car, just make sure that there's tires. It's like, well, you kind of need other things,
Yeah.
right? Like there's a whole system.
Yeah.
So really understanding our unique system. And my book does cover this. But it's looking at ourselves very holistically and understand that we each have, like, you're going to learn. And I learned this in recovery, is like, how do I take care of Beth? I had no idea. It took me a solid 2 years of talking to somebody every day who would ask me a bunch of questions about all my needs.
Mm,
I had no idea how to evaluate that. So that first piece is like, if I have a balanced system, now I can read the world,
ooh,
right?
yeah.
So if I encounter you, my empathy channel is a little clearer because my internal system is not clouded by all my bullshit.
Right.
I'm balanced, so I can read you without a bunch of projection and my own stuff and noise and chatter. I can read you. And that's awareness channel two, which is what's happening with you.
Mm,
And then once I get that going, I can ask, well, what's happening between us? Does this feel okay? Or
Mm,
do we need to get to know how to be in balance with each other?
right.
And then the fourth channel is what's going on around us that might be affecting all of that. Like, is there needs to attend to because of the environment that we're in that's affecting our ability as individuals or as a little two-party system or three-party system? Is it affecting our ability to be in balance?
Mm,
So everything in nature wants to be in balance.
right.
So
Yeah.
that's our job as human animals, is to figure out how to balance our own systems. Personally, we regulate each other, we regulate our groups.
It's beautiful. Such a great answer. And that's resonating with me big time too. It's like, yeah, recently I love what you're saying. And that's the where I feel like I'm at with my own self-work, is getting to the stage where I can just have an actual, authentic conversation with somebody, like you said, like the need for a persona, or my persona, melts away as
Yeah.
quickly as I can.
Yeah.
Initially there's going to be a little bit of I'm only human, as with most people. There's going to be
Totally.
a little bit of like,
Yeah.
okay, let's see what this person, you know what I mean? And and then go from there. So I'm definitely getting that awareness. I can actually sort of watch myself
Yeah.
acting a certain way. And I'm not quite at the stage where I can control that, but I at least have the objective sort of awareness of my own patterns. So
I
totally,
love that.
yeah,
And
totally getting what
there's
you're saying.
different language for it. Like, I love that you called it persona. And sometimes people refer to it as ego, or
Mm,
they'll refer to it as a mask, or
right.
I call it in my book, I'll refer to it as a socialized self.
Ooh, that's good. That's good.
And, like Winnicott in the object relations world, it was like referred to as like false self versus true self.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's
Yeah.
all of the ways that we guard.
Yes.
And when we first start to encounter where we're like, we are evaluating from a safety perspective, friend or foe, there's
Yeah.
something I put out there that's
Yeah.
not totally my authentic self yet.
Mm,
That's
gotcha.
like, but it's a good thing to have a little bit of a,
Yeah.
and we
Yeah.
learn to do it in a way that's, you can have a little space there that isn't an inauthentic part of you.
Right. Ooh, see, that's the key right there, right? Is when you're
Yeah.
still feeling like it's you, but there's a little bit of protection there just in case, right? And
For sure, it's a
yeah,
very wise part of you.
right,
It's
right,
not like you'll be able to trust yourself more if you slow down a little relationally
right. True enough.
and say, like, I'm here, but
Yeah.
I'm also just slowed down enough to evaluate my
Yeah.
surroundings and what I'm sensing to know if this
Yes.
is safe. So you
Yeah.
and I have never met.
Yeah.
You start asking me questions. I trust myself, so
Yeah.
I'm going to show up like super authentically. But if we started going and your questions went a little wonky and haywire, and there was like a sense of instability in our interaction or with you,
Mhm.
I might change, like, just, I might stay, but the way that I'm going to show up is just going to be a little bit different because I'm going to just stay a little bit more on guard.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Same with you. You probably have done that too, where you're like, I can be a little more open and relaxed here based on what information I'm picking up on.
Absolutely. Yeah, you get that feeling. It's that's worth mentioning too. I'm wondering what your take is on it, but when you're talking with somebody that's a fellow, in recovery, I find that persona, I imagine it's, circling back to when you got, 6 months sober and you needed that extra support of the rooms and the program, that immediacy of like going in there, and like my experience was that persona, that ego immediately melted away. I teared up. I felt like this weight came off, because I was like, okay, I'm not alone. It reflected back to me that like, I'm not alone. There's a bunch of people in
Yeah.
varying stages of the same
Yeah.
thing. They're all right in front of me. They all greeted me. They're smiling. They're having fun, which was what like totally not expected for me. And yeah, like that persona, the ego, whatever it is, just gone. And then all of a
Yeah.
sudden it's like I'm having these like 100% genuine conversations from my end. Anyways, I can't say for the other people necessarily, but that's how I perceived it. And gosh, that like literally saved my life. So
And we
worth mentioning.
probably learn how to do that in recovery, where like to let that melt away and not put that persona out first. Like to cut, if another alcoholic asks you how you are, you answer honestly because you're talking to another alcoholic. So you're like,
Right.
shitty, I'm really shitty. It's just
Yeah.
a terrible day, like
Yeah.
whereas in the rest of the world, you might not answer
Yes.
that way. I remember the first meeting that I ever went to, I was 14. So I was already a little concerned about myself at 14.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
And then 20 years later, I'm like getting sober, but or yeah, like somewhere around 20 years later. But
Yeah.
that I remember the person who was speaking at the meeting was in a like pajama onesie, and her
Yes.
story was that she had lived under a bridge and was like a homeless person for a long time, and she instantly became like my guru in that moment. I was like, I want everything she has, which it was completely because I was so stripped down to like this part. There was no persona left that I had to offer in that moment. I was like,
Right.
I'll take your onesie and I'll live under the bridge with you. Like I don't know what to do with myself right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's like there's something about that desperation and that it's like humility. It was humiliation that helped me find humility, that
Yeah.
helped me just become a person of the world and
Mm,
not like needing to be special or better than or less than or anything. Just, I remember my first sponsor saying, like, you're just a worker among workers, which is in the book,
mm.
like
Yeah.
the of AA, like just
Mm.
being a person among people. And it was such a relief. Like, oh, I can just show up. I don't have to perform. I don't have
Right.
to not perform. I just get to show up right now.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I learned that in recovery.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? I'm still hearing from you, and correct me if I'm wrong. It's something I'm relating to as well. So after I've been sober coming up on 4 years for myself, and
Congratulations.
yeah, thank you. One of the main things that I have done the work on is I took those patterns. I initially took the habit of drinking and replaced it with a healthier habit, going to the gym or doing, yoga or whatever else. And then there's still the, okay, why? What is going on here? Why did I have that? What was I numbing out? So that was the delayed reaction. So I was working on that, and I found the pattern that I continued on with was like achievement. So for me, if I was starting to get those uncomfortable feelings, I'll be like, okay, check email. Like, who can I, you know what I mean? Who can I call? What can I cross off my to-do list? And it's like literally just recently in the last year or so where I've identified that as like my new way of numbing is like
Yeah.
achieving things. And
Yeah.
then it's been a tough pill for me to swallow to like calibrate myself at just realizing that, I'm kind of getting emotional even saying it, like just that I'm enough without
Yeah.
doing all this extra stuff. Like I don't know. I still have a bit of a tough time with that. So, and I've been hearing for you, like you've had this, like, fairly, very high performance, regardless, like you mentioned, the one leg, eyes,
Yeah.
blindfold, managing to get through. So did you take that side of that work ethic, that high performance, or that high self-worth perception that you had into your recovery as well? And are you still resolving that, or kind of where are you with that? If I'm not reading too much into it.
No, it's great. And I remember, and it was probably around the same time. Like maybe I wonder if you start asked other people in recovery if it's around like 4 years where I think that like if there was like this part of me that always felt like I was doing catch up. Like I was always catching up with myself. And I think it's the codependent part that's like a
Okay.
perfectionist and it's like trying to prove yourself and prove your goodness and like God, I'm such a like fuck up from my alcoholism and then I'd like run really hard trying to
Yeah.
catch up. There was no balance there.
Right.
And so I think like with things like you can absolutely do self-care addictively there for sure. You can do
Mm,
anything addictively. And which I think just means like, is it out of balance? And is there an energy driving it? Like that again, it's like being able to sense in that in yourself, like how do you evaluate whether like people will say in the rooms, like check your motives, check yourself, like, and
right.
what's driving this right now. And
Right.
so it
Ooh,
might
okay.
still be a good thing to do, but I'm going to slow down and do it once that energy is not driving it so I can break that habit.
Mm,
And so like I had this incident over the summer where I was going through some healing stuff and I was like so uncomfortable with myself. And my daughter went, it was actually in the spring, she went to science camp for a few days. I was on the ranch by myself, and there was like a bunch of cancellations had happened in my calendar, which were just like some sort of synchronistic opening. And there, I had no projects going on. There was nothing to do. And it was just like me here. And within 24 hours, I was doing architectural drawings with like a team on remodeling another section of my barn to make a 2-bedroom apartment.
Oh.
And I fortunately, because I do a lot of awareness practice, was like sitting there with like the first draft of drawings in my lap. And I'm like, what am I doing right now? And I picked up the phone and started talking it through with my little like team of, help Beth not crash her life. And I'm like, okay, it's not a bad idea. It's not a bad project. I might do it at some point, but right
Mm.
now, why is it happening now?
Yeah.
And so it's an out of balance move. And it's because
Mm.
I'm like really sitting in stillness and there's some pain there. So
Mm.
I flip all the way to the other side and go into this like
Yeah.
hyperactive kind of overachieving mode. Like, I'm going to build something
Yeah.
amazing, Like,
Yeah.
no, you're actually
Yeah.
going to sit in the chair.
Mm.
And what's funny is what I found that I ended up doing for the next 2 days, I take tons of photos. So a lot of when I check, like, what am I up to, I look at my photo, like, I look at what have I been taking pictures of. There was like a solid 2 days of me taking pictures of dogs staring at the ground, looking at mole holes. And I was like, oh, right. So there's really nothing going on here. Like, I'm taking pictures of dogs staring at the ground. Like, this
Yeah.
is this is why,
Gotcha.
like
Okay. Yeah.
and so I think that, like, realizing I don't have to prove myself anymore and learning how to just be like a human
Mm.
being instead of a human doing.
Yeah.
And then realizing that whatever it is that I'm doing, like working out or answering emails or driving my business, those are all good things. There's nothing wrong with them. But like, what's the energy behind it? And if I wait an hour, does the energy change?
Right. Yeah.
So I don't indulge that energy anymore.
Yeah.
I'm going to like check it and like just try to break up that it becomes habituated in our nervous system. So if you can break that pattern, you're not
Mm.
addicted to all the adrenaline and cortisol and like you're getting
Yeah.
numbing from
Mm.
stress.
Right. Jeez. Yeah.
Those are
Yeah.
all numbing hormones.
Yeah.
And so I know it's like, sorry, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
that's
No,
why we do it.
that's
Yeah.
big, man. That's really big. Yeah, yeah, and yeah, I love the advice there too. Like I was doing a lot in the summertime, it's winter up here in Canada. It's quite so my chance to get outside. I mean, I'll go there for a few
Yeah.
minutes, but it was like -30, for example, a couple weeks
Oh,
back. So, I'm going out there for like a minute at a time. Whereas before, when I would have that, and I love the way you suggested it. I was purposefully disrupting what would normally be my pattern, where I have that like I view it as like my evil inner boss or like a boss that
yeah.
I've had in the past, or even my dad, right? Where there's
Yeah.
conditions to you can't go do that until you get this done. And I'd
Yes.
be like, how about I just go lay outside and watch the clouds for 10 minutes, right? So I was
Yes.
purposefully doing
Yeah.
that. And then that was allowing me to, like, as you mentioned, I didn't have like a term for it or like a verbalization, like articulation for it. But the way you word it is perfect is like checking why am I doing this? Do I need to do this right now? And it was giving me that space, even just 10 minutes of it, right? And I'm finding that I'm missing that because I haven't done that in the last. So that's up to me to figure that out for, wintertime Canada. But
Yeah.
yeah, great advice. And even you saying, dude, that like really hit me when you said, the cortisol and the adrenaline and stuff is like another numbing agent. Like, bingo, there it is. Like, that's what I needed to hear. So
So
I'm sure a lot of
usually, if
people can.
like my mentor, one of my mentors professionally, used to ask that question, like, what is the client up to, or what are you up to? Like, we're
Mm-hmm.
always, whatever we're doing makes sense.
Yeah.
And so if there's something driving you like that, and you ask that question, like, what am I up to? If I lift the hood and kind of look around, pull self, why
Mm.
would it make sense that I'm trying to numb right now?
Mm.
Instead of saying that it's a bad behavior,
Yes. Yeah.
how does it make sense?
Yeah. 100%. I love
Yeah,
that.
and
I
it's
love
just
that.
a gentler way. Like that dad voice, like that can also be like the part of us that drives and like goes towards accomplishment and achievement. Like, drive is a good thing. It
Right.
just is bad if it's like mean.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah.
And
Exactly.
punitive and like
Yeah.
hurting us, right? But like there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong as a phenomenon. Drive is part of our survival.
Right.
It's a
Yeah.
beautiful thing. You want
Yeah.
to use it.
That's right. And that's and that, exactly. And we know it's some of the subjects that we've been talking about today. Like there's like the pendulum swing. So if I go
Yes.
too far the other way and rebel against this, then what am I going to be, the guy sitting on my couch eating Cheetos all day? Like there's going to be this calibration that works for
Yes.
me. And like you say, a gentler approach that doesn't have this pressure language. But I've kind of swung a few times on the pendulum, and now I'm like really respectful, and I love that side of me that had that drive, and just figuring out a way that it's like
Yeah.
interacts in like all the different personalities, voices in my head, where where it really works for me for best. So yeah, wonderful. Thank you. I want to
Figuring
really
out when to use it and how to use it to
ooh
in a way that's helpful and feels good for you rather than it using you. You're
ooh
learning how to use it
yes ooh I
and
love
be
that.
intentional about like I'm gonna downshift into second gear so I can like you're gonna
Yeah.
make a choice instead of it just running you.
Bingo. Yeah, that's very well put. Beth, really want to be respectful of your time today. I could talk to you for another hour easily.
I
Um,
know this has been so great. I
very good.
where in Canada are you?
Edmonton, are you
Oh, okay.
familiar?
Yeah. I'm from
Northern.
Michigan
Okay,
and I have Canadian friends all over Canada and
very
so,
cool.
but nobody in Edmonton.
Nobody in
So
Edmonton. Okay, I was
no,
gonna say
no.
anytime you want to have a coffee or something, if you're up this way for sure.
Yeah.
Have you spent much time in the Canadian Rockies? Have you gone to Banff or
I have
Jasper?
not. I would love.
Ooh, it's a
Yeah.
must. Oh,
I
it's
need
so
to do
beautiful.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we spend a lot of time out there. Yeah, so cool. I guess so. Michigan, so you probably some more friends like in Toronto or like Ontario.
Ontario.
Yeah,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Yeah. But I
Yeah, yeah.
have quite a number of people in like Calgary,
Oh, okay.
area. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's yeah.
And then Nova Scotia.
Oh,
So
beautiful.
actually like all across yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I've always wanted to get out to Nova Scotia. It looks beautiful out there. My brother lives in Vancouver. I don't know if you've had a chance to go
Yeah.
to that coast. Oh, such a beautiful city.
So
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome. And so California is where you currently are, correct?
I am, but I'm in the process of moving to Maine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when is
So
that taking
that's
place?
happening in the spring. So I'm moving
Oh,
my whole operation to Maine, and
that
then
sounds like
the
quite the
ranch
process.
is. It looks like I'm probably turning it into a retreat center
Awesome. That is
here
so
in
cool.
California, so it's still use it
Used,
and
yeah. Yeah.
allow other people to use the space. But I'm yeah expanding to Maine.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
thank you.
And it's really cool that you do get to keep the current place that you're in, because it feels like there's a lot of goodwill and energy, positive energy that you've brought forth, and it's like a healing ground. So the fact that your next natural step is retreat, and so it's really cool that
Yeah.
you're doing that. So
Yeah,
congratulations.
I'm
It's
really
amazing.
hoping that works out. This land is magic and it's
I
been
can
such a
imagine.
joy to share it with others. And so I yeah.
Yeah, well, I guess my question is, what is the need to leave? Like, what's in Maine that's drawing you there?
So I'm it's a blended family
Gotcha.
situation. We've
Okay.
been bi-coastal for 2 years and
Yeah,
we just want to be together.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Totally
Yeah.
understandable. Yeah,
Yeah.
awesome. Two final questions for
Sure.
you for today, anyways.
Yeah.
I definitely want to have you back on for part two
Okay.
after you get
I'd love
everything else
that.
sorted
Yeah.
out with everything that you got going on in springtime. Okay, so the word integrated, that gets it's another one of those, like, I don't know, in the coaching industry
Yeah.
specific integration and all this, right? So how do you go about, I guess, just the topic integration? Yeah, so far, like, you've had such a wonderful way of like articulating things. What is your take on like integration, and I guess specifically like integrating past patterns or what you've perceived as like darker sides of yourself, and integrating them and bringing them to a more cohesive oneness with yourself?
Yeah, interesting. Such an interesting question. I'm systems theory trained. And so if I think about it through like a systems theory lens, which I try to do first and foremost, like, okay, from
Mm,
a systemic perspective, what does integration mean? And I think that it means that the elements of the system are in balance
mhm.
so that all of the elements of the system are getting what they need and there isn't a certain aspect of the system that's getting too much or a certain aspect that's not getting enough. So it's in balance enough to be able to function.
Ooh, okay.
And so I think that when people are talking about integration, like they're like you said, like there's destructive parts of yourself. Well, the shadow part of ourselves, for instance, which is like a Jungian term for like that dark side or that shadow part of ourselves, integrating, like learning what parts of that are actually helpful and useful, and I'm going to bring that so that it can come into balance with the rest of my system would be like an integration practice.
Yeah.
So I'm going to allow for all of the things to be here, but I'm going to fine tune all of the channels so that it comes into balance in the way that my organism functions. And each
Mm,
one of us has our own. We have to find out what that system, what balance feels like in
yes.
our unique system.
Yeah.
And
Ooh.
so, and I guess periodically there's, like cancer in a system is not an aspect you would want to integrate,
Right.
right? Like
Right.
active
Okay. Yeah.
alcoholism is not an integrated part of me anymore.
Yeah.
But I did have to figure out a way that the ism of the
Mm,
alcoholism did need to get integrated,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I think once in a while we discover a part of ourselves or an element of our lives that we're not able to integrate. Like
Yeah.
my marriage, I couldn't have that. It was not integratable. I did
Right.
everything I could to try to
Yeah.
integrate it, and it ultimately was not anymore. And so it was causing so much imbalance
Mm,
that it couldn't survive. And so, but I think that's probably the way that I view it, is looking at it more from like a whole system perspective,
mm,
and and again trying to think about it as the system by nature wants to come into balance.
yeah.
And so if that's the case, then how do we become part of that process?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that would be the process of integrating.
Yeah. Again,
Sorting.
fantastic
It's like
answer.
sorting
Sorting.
parts.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I like the idea, and it really ties in with some of the other things that we're talking about. Is like, there's pendulum swinging and such, and then finding your own style, and that's where there's like that fine tuning or the nuance depending on your own personality, personal life experiences, and such. I really like that, and it reminds me a lot of like what you talk about in the rooms, like the emotional sobriety, where like getting rid of this hierarchy that like there's bad emotions, there's good emotion, then you're
Yeah.
throwing this like lens of judgment or personal preference on it versus
Yeah.
just like experiencing them. They're all emotions. It's like a weather front. You could curse the rain, especially for the flooding, but that's a whole other story. But like the rain, but the rain is like life giving, right? So
Right.
why not just like enjoy the rain? Like just see it for what it is. See the emotions for what they are. And I love the word allow. And that's a big one for me now, is just allowing all the emotions. Whereas before
Yeah.
I did have preferences and I was
Right.
afraid of a lot of emotions, right? Hence the drinking, right? So yeah, ooh, such good stuff. Final question. It's another
Okay.
I word, and I think it's one of your favorite ones. As soon as you said imagination and your like love of imagination, I just love just imagination in general, talking about it. So just like kind of a more whimsical way to end the interview here. Just imagination, whatever you want to say about it. Why is it important? Yeah, imagination.
Well, it's I think the creative part of us is a core element of our survival and our ability to envision and create um, and innovate. Um, but to do so, like I think when we're engaged in an imaginative process or a creative process, we're using like a core survival skill and playfulness at the same time,
Ooh.
which I think um, lights up these parts of like the human animal in ways that I think it creates like a sense of joy and aliveness in us that
Mm.
you certainly see in children, and that we then as adults kind of I like truncate that or like kind of cut off that part of ourselves, but it's actually very, very needed in
Mm.
how we move our lives forward. Like the ability to envision something that doesn't exist yet, or that just that creative spirit. I think that so when I think about imagination, I mean, it's certainly like it's a playful place, and it's like it's a great place at any stage of life for the human animal to get joy and
Mm,
be playful alone or with others.
hmm, hmm.
And it just looks different at different stages of life.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like that word gets stuck in childhood. And
Right.
the result of that is we have these like very dulled out adults, and it's like, you can have a vibrancy like
Right.
inside and in your
Yeah.
life and not be a freak show. Like you can have like, and we do it through all kinds of imaginative processes. And I mean, scientists are using imagination all the time, and
Sure.
that's
Yeah.
not like you wouldn't call it artistic, you'd call it
Right.
science, right? But
Yeah.
like it's still using the imagination.
Yeah.
And so I think it's one of those words that gets kind of a bad rap.
I agree with you. And that's why I thought it was important to go back to it, circle back to it. I
Yeah.
wrote it down as soon as, because that's one of the first subjects we got into, just talking about you as a
Yeah.
child. And imagine, I'm like, I really want to circle back to that. And there's one story that you talked about Carl Jung earlier. Fairly certain it was him. Anyways, you correct me if I'm wrong if you've heard this
Yeah.
one, but he was big into. There was something that was missing from his life and all the research he was doing and such. And he remembered back to when he was like 6 years old, what really gave him joy. And one of the elements was like playing with army men. So he literally started like playing with army men again at like age 40 something, and it opened up this whole other thing inside him. And I'm like, man, if Carl Jung can play with army men, certainly I can play with Lego. You know what I mean? So
That's
uh
why I run around with animals. Like, it's
right.
like, how can you get out of this, like, very self conscious intellectual part of ourselves that's useful, but like has limitations?
Yeah.
Where in the imagination, it's like, it allows us, it's like those portals of psychedelics we were talking about. There's all these ways to find this kind of boundless part, like the
Yeah.
borderless parts of our brain, our mind, our spirit. And so I think anything we can do that's imaginative and
Mm,
to really just expand what that means. So I love
yeah.
that question so much.
Yeah.
And
Cool.
man, I use my imagination and creativity in absolutely everything that I do.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's like that whole brain thinking, right? There's like the logic side, the creative, and then just, when you think of some of the greatest thinkers over the, like Einstein and Leonardo da Vinci, like total like whole brain thinkers, they had a lot of tons of logic. Yet, Einstein's a
Oh yeah.
musician as well, right? And so
Yeah.
he had that both sides of him going. So yeah, amazing stuff. Wonderful conversation today,
Such
Beth.
a
Thank you
great
so
conversation. I
much.
really enjoyed this.
It was wonderful. So, if anybody wants to reach out to you or find your book, any social, I'll have it in the show notes. But I'd love to give you the opportunity to also verbalize it.
Sure, you can go to my website, thecircleupexperience.com, and pretty much everything related to what I do is covered in that site, including the book. And the book is sold at bookstores everywhere, and there's also links to it on the website.
Excellent. And the Circle Up experience, if you could give a subtitle to that, like what is the Circle Up experience?
The Circle Up experience is the work that we do teaching and helping people come to life with their natural leadership through nature and animals so that we can exist in our human groups with more life and balance and joy.
Wonderful. One final question. The natural leadership is I'm imagining, correct me if I'm wrong, that would be like when you're very much in alignment, a lot of the different words and terms we've talked about today, that is natural leadership. Is that
Natural leadership's the model that I created and teach that is bringing this mammalian part of us and all of its signals and wisdom to our consciousness so that we can take care of ourselves and get our own needs met and also be able to read others and the environment around us more accurately. It's
beautiful?
that animal part of us
Yes.
and that's our natural, that part of us that we're born with that then gets taught out of us as soon as we start sitting in desks in first
Mm,
grade.
right. Ooh, that's good. We'll put a pin in it for
Okay,
now. Part
excellent.
one. Thank you so much for coming on
Okay,
today, Beth.
thank you.
Thank you.